Hi, I'm Dr. Mike Evangel. I'm a chiropractic physician. I've been in practice for the last 34 years. I'm also the host of the Super Mike Show. But this show is not my show, it's your show. The reason why we've designed this show to be your survival guide to life. We'll cover topics such as health, fitness, nutrition, longevity, the environment, and personal safety, which is the topic for today. Why do you need a survival guide? Well, there's so much confusion and misinformation out there today. People don't know what the truth is. For example, are cell phones safe or do they cause brain cancer? Every week, we'll cut through the confusion and misinformation and bring the truth to you. With that truth, you can share it with others. When you help others, you will become their holistic hero. The topic for today, active shooter scenarios. It can happen any place, at any time, to anyone. When I taught martial arts to my students, I tell them always expect the unexpected. Be prepared. You never know what's going to happen. Just within the last 24 hours, there have been several active shooter situations in our country. It's been happening way too much. We'll examine the reasons, but one reason that a lot of people don't think about is that selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, that classification of a drug, causes potential suicide and homicide. It's called black box warnings on the literature. What we can do is we can do natural things to fight depression. For example, what we can do is we can take probiotics. We can take vitamin D, go out in the sun. We can laugh. We can exercise, eat fermented foods, and eat our way to good health. Now, when people are depressed, they can do horrible things sometimes themselves and to others. And an important thing to remember is that if you know anybody that possibly could have a problem, get them help. After the break, we'll meet Tom Patire, who is considered by many to be America's personal safety expert. We'll be back after these words. Hey, welcome back. We're here with Tom Patire. Tom, thanks for being on my show.
Thank you, Dr. Mike.
Now, you've educated the public, you've educated law enforcement, the military, about personal safety, protection, and I consider you to be one of the world's foremost authorities on these subjects. I've worked with you with federal agencies from decades ago, from the 1990s. We were down at Fort Dix teaching the FBI defensive tactics instructors, which was a lot of fun, by the way.
Yes, sir.
And you also run an elite bodyguard service to a lot of the who's who in America. And I know that you use a 6-man protection detail, which is the same thing that's used by the Secret Service and the U.S. Marshals. You're also a motivational speaker, an inspirational speaker. You have best-selling books and DVDs, and it's a pleasure to have you on the show today.
Well, thank you for having me.
Now, we were young growing up. Active shooter scenarios, I never heard of it. Why is there such an increase today?
Well, it's two reasons. One is accessibility. All right, there's many, many places with many, many people all occupied doing their own thing, enjoying, which brings in an active shooter to catch them by the element of surprise. Vulnerability. And the aspect of vulnerability is because they're looking one way or doing certain things, these active shooters can come in when their back is toward them and take advantage of the scenario. So those are the two key things that will always lurk in society, that'll always be there, that'll always give the active shooter an edge.
Do you think the copycat syndrome has a lot to do with this? Because I know that when we were kids too, there were no hijackings of airplanes.
Yes, I think it plays a role because of a couple things. Number one, the success rate is so high. In active shooter, it's almost 100%. And because of the success rate being that high, people that want to make a name for themselves, maybe they're, deranged, maybe heavily medicated, as you stated before, or they're part of domestic terrorism, which is infiltrating this company, whether people want to believe that or not. Seeing how high the success rate is, seeing the damage they could do, seeing the name they could make and the statement they could make definitely plays a role.
Well, it's one thing I know a lot of times in the news, it's not a good idea to give them that much publicity because they thrive on it.
Yes, and the problem in our society, and not only our society, but worldwide, is bad press sells better than good press. if we would put these things to sleep, not put these people on and make them heroes out there in their own world for all the negative things they're doing, and how we making them heroes, we're giving them press, is put them to sleep. Don't mention their name, don't mention their background, don't mention who they are, just let it go. Give them the least press that's necessary, which now takes them out of the headlines. That's going to hurt them more than the laws.
Not like the Rolling Stone magazine putting somebody that did terroristic act on the cover, which I won't even mention who it was because we're not going to give any more publicity on that.
Right. Business sells through different things, and TV shows, radio shows, magazines sell through things that get the most headlines, the most eyeballs. Right now, it's active shooter.
Where does this happen? Mostly the schools or?
Well,
other
it started
places?
out first in the schools and the worship centers, and those are usually to make a statement. The worship centers is because people didn't believe in the religion. The schools to break the hearts of America because you're going after kids. Now it's anywhere, any place, anytime. So you got to watch it at malls. You got to watch it at sporting events. You got to watch anything that has mass people that create mass casualties that will get mass headlines. And that's where you have to worry.
We'll get back to active shooter in a minute, but I just want to mention a few more things. I know you've developed CDT, which is an unbelievable system. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, thank you. When I started my executive protection service, I realized the laws were not in our favor on putting our hands on people. And bodyguards are not like the movies. All right, we're confrontational avoidance, but when we have to enter into control people. So I created a controlling system to help law enforcement, to help security, and now it's in different groups like Facebook, Google, Microsoft, all have their people trained in it to learn how to control an individual without hurting them. It's the first phase of force, known as soft-handed, as you know, being a martial art expert, and that's where CDT was developed for.
Very good. Okay, after the break, we'll be back. A few more things on active shooter and a couple other topics because this man knows what he's doing. In my opinion, he is the real-life Jason Bourne. And we're back. Take us through the average type of active shooter scenario.
Okay, so the average active shooter scenario isn't like they just roll up in a car, pick a weapon, and go to it. They've done their homework. They've picked out the spot. They know how many people you circulate. There's a method to their madness, and they enter in at a certain time, certain place. Again, mass casualties, mass headlines, mass damage. The key with the active shooter scenario is they come in blindsided. They open up in an arsenal with their weapons, usually long gun first, then they transition to a short gun, and they just start shooting, the spray and play mentality. So it's key that if you're in that active shooter scenario to know what to do. And this is where people will say, well, run, hide, fight. Okay, so that's the national norm. But how do you run? Okay, where do you hide? And you're not fighting anybody. You're either diffusing, disarming, or taking somebody out, which, as you know, as being a martial art expert, that's not an easy thing. So I think the message is good that we're empowering people, but it's convoluted because they're not showing people the right way to do it.
And how long does it usually last as far as a short active shooter scenario to a longer one?
Well, if you take the beginning to the end, some of them have been 30 seconds to a minute. The ones that are more extended, 2.5 to 3 minutes. Thank God that law enforcement response time is quicker. There's always going to be somebody in the crowd that knows what they're doing. So they usually will end under 3 minutes. But in 3 minutes, there's a lot of damage.
Do you think additional police patrols are a good idea to reduce the incidence of active shooter scenarios?
Well, remember, police are a reactive body. That's why they were born into that profession. And though their appearance and though their presence is a positive, there's not enough of them. So if an active shooter is waiting in his car, a police officer passes by, he gives him 2, 3, 4 minutes to go on, he's still going to enter in. So though it may be good to deter a percentage, the percentage would be a small percentage. So I don't think that's the ultimate answer.
Well, the other situation, how about having security on the premises, like at a church, at a school?
Good point. The problem is what type of security. Everything is budget driven. Schools, malls, hospitals, they all pay for security, but they use budgets. Well, it might never happen here. So they're paying for low-level security with non-existing training to prevent something. It's just a show of face. You know, what they would have to do is invest time and money to pick the right type of security people with good backgrounds that know the readability, all right, and know the diffusion of what to do, when to do it. All right, again, we're budget conscious. So school districts don't have the money, hospitals always watching what they spend, and malls are always budget conscious. So yes, it may be the answer, but they're gonna have to invest in an A-type security group.
I talked earlier in the program about the confusion and controversy, and there's a lot around active shooter scenarios. You have martial artists giving advice, you have private security giving advice, you have police giving advice. What's your opinion of the programs out there today?
Well, one of the things that really gets to me, and believe me, we love and are pro martial artists, but I watched a scenario at a martial arts school where they were teaching 10, 11, and 12-year-olds how to rush a gunman in an active shooter scenario. Now, at one time, did they address what the firearm could do? What happens when that bullet leaves the gun and the damage it creates? So you're telling these kids, instead of ride and hide or run and hide, you're telling them to jump the shooter with no idea of what damage could be done to them. So I'm not big on that mentality. You know, the police avenue of education, empowering, you know, the different programs that are out there are good, but you still have to bring in reality. Show them what a firearm will do, what a chaotic situation is about, and how mass hysteria can hurt you or help you. So the training has to be revamped.
You talked about young children being trained. For example, many of us have kids. What training do we need to tell our children, if they're in a situation, what to do?
Well, first you have to empower children in the aspect of awareness. They have to be educated in a non-fearful based manner for them to understand it. Two, you have to teach kids to be an obstacle in an obstacle situation. That means that when they run, they got to change the contour of their body. When they hide, they got to know the difference of cover and concealment. All right, when they lay still, they got to change their body position to protect their vitals. All these things are not addressed in training. You know, so it's better to focus on the run and the hide and leave the fight mentality to people that really know how to defend.
Also, when they run, they should run in an erratic pattern, not just a straight line?
Yep, absolutely. Remember, these active shooters aren't professional shooters. It's hard enough for a good shooter, seasoned with weaponry, to hit a moving target. These guys that are just pulling the trigger and bouncing it, you know, the odds of hitting, you know, a child or a person in a vital when they're moving is not in their favor.
Okay, after the break, we'll be back, more about active shooter and a few other situations that Tom Patire is an expert in. We'll be back. And we're back with Tom Patire. Before we get back to active shooter, a few more things that Tom's an expert in. Now, when you teach the military, for example, you work with cadets from West Point and U.S. Navy SEALs. What type of training is different? Because they're not looking to necessarily control somebody. Military has a different objective. How do you work with them?
Yes, first of all, when I get the honor to teach these groups, it's under their conditions and what they're being assigned to do. So the mentality is, at first, their primary is always going to be weaponry. You know, so what happens if their weapon jams? You know, what do they do? So you're teaching high-level attacks, which I call last resort techniques, and for them to take out that subject and get back to their primary, secondary weapon. Totally different, but remember, they're trained to protect our country. Their mindset's totally different. Their skill level's totally different. They adhere to aggressiveness where your average person does not.
And a totally different scenario, you teach a lot of nurses and workplace violence programs. Tell us about that.
Yes, New Jersey created the first workplace violence law for hospitals. And with that being said, we created a program. We have Nurse Safe, Clinician Safe, Physician Safe. It's a 2-hour program of educationalizing them in readability and also teaching them self-escape techniques by aggressive patients or aggressive people. It's not self-defense. It's not martial arts. People get irate, and you know this, given the wrong medication, their diet's wrong or something, they act out, they put their hands on these medical personnel. They need to know how to get away from them, not defend against them.
Because as we all know, you never lose a fight you're not in.
Well said, well said.
And avoidance is key. Right, back to active shooter. How about getting the guns off the street? There's a lot of talk now about laws to remove guns. What's your opinion on that?
Yeah, the legislation is out there. You know, weapons are a necessary evil in different professions. I carry one for a living. I get it. The capacity of long-range weapons, long guns, you know, maybe they'll dampen them. But look at the laws. It doesn't hurt to have them, but it's not going to stop it. You have laws on drugs. We have drug epidemics. Okay, you have laws on breaking into homes and things like that. Home invasions have increased. Just because you say you can't have the weapons, don't mean they won't steal or get the weapons. Will it dampen that to some? Well, what are they doing now? As you saw on August 3rd, they took a vehicle and drove it into 40 people. They did more damage with that vehicle than they did in an active shooter with a gun. They're always going to find another way. But I would support the law of, you know, with weaponry, as long they do it right and they think about the good person that wants a weapon as well.
Well, ideally, you get the guns out of the bad people's hands and only into the good people's hands, but that's really a fairy tale.
Perfect world, and we're not in that.
And we're not in that. Now, what people want to know, if you were in a situation where there's an active shooter, what would you do?
Good question. Okay, first of all, no scenario is ever going to be the same. You know, I was born into the profession of protecting. I don't want to die in one as a hero. You know, so the biggest thing that I would do, is there enough space for me to get to the blind side of an active shooter and get him? That would be scenario one. Scenario two is, if that weapon's pointed to me, is there somewhere that I can hide under cover or concealment, you know, and play dead? Because if you're moving too quick and you're within his range, you're going. Mm-hmm. Number three, if I chose to run, it would be in an erratic pattern with obstacles in the way, with me getting the furthest out of his line of sight. Remember, the active shooter doesn't stay in one pattern. He constantly moves and he changes direction. But as a skilled person like yourself, I would have a responsibility to try to make the move to defend. If I was with a loved one, the move would be to get them out of there and to think of their well-being, not everybody else's.
Primary. And then would you return?
Depends on the scenario. Depends on where the shooter is and well. But would I feel bad if I didn't? Yes.
Well said. The problem is that we never know what we'll do until we're in a given situation. But the more you prepare mentally ahead of time and put yourselves in a hypothetical scenario, the better chance you have to have a database to refer to do what you think might be the right thing in that situation.
And you bring up a good point. I was at a talk recently of a bunch of martial artists, and a guy raised his hand and he says, "Sir," he goes, "at night," he goes, "I dream of being on a plane that's hijacked or being in an active shooter and saving everybody." He goes, "What do you dream of?" I go, "Hitting the lottery." All right, I don't dream of being in violence. I rather just, you know, have a lottery ticket and live a good life. So some people need to change their thought process.
Any final tips for everybody as far as how to avoid things, what to look for, situations that they might be in? Because I know one thing I tell people all the time is what's off, what doesn't look right.
Yeah, as an expert, I see things one way. As a father, I see things another way. So as a parent, I would tell them, listen, you want to avoid telling your kids about these scenarios, but they're more frequent and will become more frequent than they've ever been. So you got to find somewhere where they get educated and empowered of what to do. Focus more on running and hiding. Don't go to martial arts centers that are going to try to teach them to disarm bad guys. It's not going to happen. They're kids. They need to live. They're fast. They're quick. They're smart. They're versatile. Get them out of Dodge. As an expert, I say this to parents. It's your responsibility to be your own bodyguard. So you need to get into some type of training just in case you're in the wrong place at the wrong time and you're dealing with a situation that means you have the right to live or die. If the answer is live, you need training.
How about pepper spray or mace? Because a lot of people talk about that. Do you recommend that or not really?
Yeah, it depends on the state. Each state has its different laws. Some allow pepper spray, some allow mace. The thing is, number one, most people, fumble with it. Number two is you may spray everybody in a bad situation. Now they can't run or hide and make matters worse. If you keep it compact and you rust your shooter and you get to his eyes, yes. But you know this. People train one time, they never train again. They go to duress conditions, they forget what they learned.
Sure.
So you got to stay on your training.
Okay. Well, thank you very much for being on the show. It's been a pleasure, and I'll be looking forward to having you on again sometime in the future.
And thank you for making a difference. It means a lot for people to hear the whole aspect of things.
There is only one truth. Each and every episode will continue to do our best to bring the truth to you with the hope that you and your loved ones can live healthier, safer, and more fulfilling lives. I'm Dr. Mike, and thanks for watching our show. Until next time.